Good morning, America. This is the Cats Roundtable. John Catsimatidis here Sunday morning. Well, let's go around the world. There's so many problems we're having. Where do we begin? With us is a good friend of mine. His name is Dr. William Parker, and he's the CEO and president of East-West Institute, and now he has moved on. He's the CEO of Efficient Ships, and he served over 30 years in the Navy, and he has quite a career. Good morning, Dr. Parker. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Catsimatidis. I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be back on your show, as always.
Dr. Parker, you've been around the world. You were in the Navy, and you've done so many great things for our country. Where do you want to begin? Should we begin on the Russian situation? I mean, nobody really knows what to think of what happens between Putin and President Biden.
Well, I think that's a great place to start, if you don't mind. The escalation in Ukraine, if you will, really started back in 2014 is when things started simmering, and Russian military crossed into the Ukrainian territory back then, and then they had the annexing of Crimea, and then they began expanding rebellions in Ukraine. And then there was this ceasefire in 2015, but it was kind of elusive. And then you had some spikes throughout the last couple of years. Now President Putin is saying that he sees an increasingly threat as NATO is expanding its advisory and weaponization in Ukraine and the region. And meanwhile, you have President Biden, who's saying he's seeking a stable relationship with Russia, and he does not intend to put any military, U.S. military or NATO, into the area. So that's kind of where we're at to start. And then beyond that, of course, you have the 100,000 Russian troops that are sitting on the border. They by far would overwhelm Ukraine very quickly. As a matter of fact, I think they have more fighter aircraft than all of Ukraine's aircraft combined. And they would just overwhelm Ukraine very quickly, be a bloodbath. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians do have some pretty good weapons that were provided by the United States and others, and are digging in and ready to fight if they have to.
Do you feel things will calm down, or are you more optimistic that they're going to calm down? I mean, you were CEO of the East-West Institute, and your specialty was calming things down. Do you feel they're going to calm down, or you think that Putin wants a fight?
If you would have asked me that a few years ago when we were doing a lot of interaction with the Russians and had an office in Moscow, et cetera, I would have said that this will calm down. In this particular case, when you look at the additional efforts that are going on by Putin now internal to the country of Ukraine, when you look at the massive buildup, the slow and massive buildup that's happened on the border, I'm less optimistic now than I have been at any point since 2014. So I'm more concerned now. I'm also concerned that you could have some kind of simultaneous event. I mean, hopefully cooler minds prevail. But, the Russians and the Chinese are very close and getting closer by the day. And so a simultaneous event where Russia rolls into Ukraine and China invades Taiwan is certainly not out of the question. Do I think that's going to happen? No, because I think that at the end of the day, Xi Jinping realizes that it's more of a threat for his own well-being. If he does not attack, I think he's in better shape. So I'm not sure that, in fact, China will roll into Taiwan. I think it's more likely, though, that you may see Russia roll into Ukraine.
Well, Russia going into Ukraine will be step one of going into other neighboring countries over there and regaining what the old USSR is, and I think that is Putin's dream. What say you?
I agree with you completely that that's his dream, but I also think that Putin is a realist. So I think if he thinks he can get away with it, I think he probably thinks more that he can get away with it now than ever by the fact that President Biden has come out and said he's not putting troops in the area, with the exception of the small amount of advisors that we have. So with that said, and the fact the United States and NATO do not seem to be willing to put troops on the ground there, I think there is more of a likelihood that that would happen. I think there's less of a likelihood with Xi Jinping going into Taiwan in particular, although there were multiple incursions into Taiwan's airspace, as we know, testing to see what would happen. And again, I think testing to see whether or not the United States would move a large force into the area to protect Taiwan, which we did not do. But I still think that Xi is looking at the fact that he's coming up on an unprecedented third election for a third term, and for all practical purposes, he will be a dictator for life. And I don't think he wants to risk that because he realizes the uncertainty of war impacts the stability of the residing, in this case,
I agree with you. I think Xi Jinping is looking to get the Olympics done, even though if he has a few dissenting countries. So I think that he's going to leave things alone until the Olympics are done, minimum. And then if he does something stupid in between the Olympics and the American election day, then he's going to realize he's committing suicide, because the American people are going to vote straight Republican because they're going to be really annoyed at what's going on. What say you on that?
I would agree with that. I would also agree that put aside for a second the elections in the United States, the reality is that internal to his own country, I think the Communist Chinese Party would be under an extreme amount of pressure if they went to war with Taiwan, especially if that was protracted. And that's not going to be a walk across the street and win. Unless the Taiwanese just give up and leadership gives up, and there's no indication that's going to happen. This is going to be a fight, and a protracted fight, and the Taiwanese are ready for that fight, I think. So I think that could be a very long, protracted, expensive, bloody fight for Taiwan.
Well, Afghanistan surrendered in 72 hours.
Yeah, Afghanistan did surrender in 72 hours, but Taiwan is not Afghanistan, and nobody should compare the two in any way, shape, or form, with the exception of the fact that there was an expectation that the United States stay until Afghanistan was a sovereign, stable, self-reliant country, which the extraction out of there was a disaster, and the impact was we're still seeing. And speaking of Afghanistan, when you look at the number of people that are starving in that country right now, it's absurd. You know, in 2001, when we first went in, the starvation rate was just under 50%. That number, while we were there, got as low as about 22%. Still a terrible number, but that's a much lower number than it is today. Today, they're looking at about 23 million people starving, which is better than half the population. So we're actually in a worse position. Their country is in a worse position now than it ever has been. And frankly, if we're not doing airdrops into Afghanistan to help feed these people in the near future, I think we're missing out. I think we're missing out morally. I also think we're missing out from a national security perspective, because remember, this generation of people will remember that the United States left. And did we leave and come back and feed them, or did we just leave? And if we come back to feed them, we have to ensure that if we airdrop food, et cetera, every piece of food that gets airdropped needs to have an American flag on it somewhere, to ensure that people understand where this is coming from. It's coming from the taxpayers of the United States, to make sure that these people don't starve after we departed in such a hasty and unprofessional manner.
Well, Dr. Bill Parker, thank you so much for everything you've done for our country, and continue to speak out and do for our country. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on your show, as always.